Well, a flurry of earnings coming in over the last 24 hours, and Warner Brothers Discovery continuing to make waves as shares this morning down 16%. The company posting a loss for the quarter, but it wasn't the financials that caught attention. It's really the rocky road ahead for HBO Max as Batgirl got the axe from the company's higher-ups, and also conversation over the fate of HBO Max entirely and whether or not they're going to merge that. It sounds like that's the plan with Discovery Plus, but a lot of people kind of worried about what's going to happen to HBO Max and the content that's on there.
Yeah, we kind of just skimmed over the losses there, but more than $1 billion in restructuring and other charges. I mean, This is a company that is very much in shakeup mode, and this was to be expected in some ways, obviously because of the merger that happened. But some interesting comments coming from David Zaslav yesterday on the back of their results. He talked a lot about the need to really sort of rein in costs, but also go with quality over quantity, which you could argue, investors would say, look, if you see what's happened with Netflix, that's a fair strategy. But the way in which he's gone about it, he has been very aggressive. First of all, coming in through the door, axing CNN Plus, even though that was only on the air for 3 months or 3 weeks, I should say, not months.
Like less than that, yeah.
So now he's talking about trying to slash costs because there are a lot of redundancies between HBO Max and then what was remained of HBO. Because the question really is, what is the ultimate strategy here? Number one, are investors on board? But also, you've got to think, he's in the content business. If you've got a guy that's coming in saying, well, Batgirl's all done, but this just doesn't meet my quality standard, what does that mean for other content down the line?
Well, yeah, and we have to remember that there were some tax implications to that as well, right? You can write this off and maybe get a little bit of a tax windfall from that. But I think that broadly speaking, your point is still salient, which is that David Zaslav likely wanted to send a message with this Batgirl cancellation, right? It's not just about that movie itself. Yes, indeed, maybe it didn't meet the standards that they were hoping for. But at the same time, the idea is that not just at HBO Max, at all the streaming companies, including at Netflix, there has been a lot of spending. And what does spending do? It makes your debt go up at your company. That's the similar story that we've heard at Netflix. Recently, their story has kind of shifted a little bit more towards the free cash flow. But especially as we get into a recessionary environment where people might be pulling back on their spending on these streaming platforms, they need to be a little bit tighter on their belt. And I think that's the message that David Zaslav wants to send. It's not about Batgirl. I'm sure he's a huge DC fan and maybe loves Batgirl specifically. But that's not what it's about. It's about making sure that your budget is tight and that you're not blowing all this money on things you shouldn't be blowing money on.
Well, he is a huge DC fan because he wants to build that franchise that even more, right? But I guess the counter argument is if you're David Zaslav coming in, you're saying, well, we already have a lot of content in our library because we're going to merge all the assets together. Documentaries from CNN, you've got reality shows coming in from Discovery Plus, and then what you've already got on HBO. So in some ways, I guess the argument would be on his end that we don't need to be blowing all this money on mediocre content. That really does raise the bar for the quality of what they put out in terms of new shows moving forward.
And lastly, I want to point out that, there's a lot of just, I think, outside of people who are invested in WBD, for example, there's just a lot of interest in what's going to happen with these two platforms. Like, people have noticed that HBO Max has been kind of quietly pulling a few titles and whatnot. I mean, all that content is going to live somewhere at some point, right? I don't think we have to worry about, no one's ever going to find Game of Thrones on any streaming platform anymore. This is going to be part of an over-year-long process, likely, to just figure out where they want to put that. And it could be a bumpy year.
And really going line by line to say, what do we need to get rid of?